Live updates. Trump scrambling to announce trade deals ahead of self-imposed deadline. In a dramatic race against time, former President Donald Trump is frantically working to finalize and announce trade agreements before a looming self-imposed deadline triggers sweeping tariffs on imports from numerous countries this Friday. This ticking clock has created a whirlwind of diplomatic activity with mixed outcomes so far. On one hand, there's progress. Trump confirmed the broad strokes of a trade deal with South Korea earlier this week. But here's where it gets controversial. Just as things seemed hoped for, another major negotiation hit a snag. In an unexpected twist, Canada's announcement that it plans to recognize a Palestinian state has cast serious doubt over whether a trade agreement between Ottawa and Washington can be reached in time. Trump wasted no time expressing his frustration, stating on social media that this decision by Canada makes the deal very hard. And this is the part most people miss. These aren't just abstract negotiations. They have real-world consequences for businesses, consumers, and global relations. But let's zoom out for a moment. Why are these deadlines and deals such a big deal? The answer lies in Trump's unyielding belief in using tariffs as both a shield and a sword. For decades, he has viewed tariffs as tools to protect American industries and force other nations into more favorable trade terms. Yet, critics argue that his approach often creates chaos, disrupts markets, and strains alliances. Take, for instance, the recent pushback from Senate Republicans when Trump floated the idea of using tariff revenues to issue rebates to Americans. Lawmakers quickly dismissed the proposal, highlighting the ongoing tension within his own party over how best to implement economic policies. So what does all this mean for everyday Americans? Well, companies like Procter & Gamble, the makers of household staples like Dawn dish soap and Charmin toilet paper, are already planning price hikes due to the financial impact of these tariffs. Imagine walking into your local grocery store, only to find essentials costing significantly more, all because of decisions made behind closed doors. Meanwhile, legal challenges continue to mount against Trump's tariff strategy. A federal appellate court is set to hear arguments challenging the legality of bypassing Congress to impose these measures. At the heart of the case is a fundamental question. Does the administration have the authority to sidestep standard procedures in declaring emergencies related to trade? Small businesses and several states argue that no such emergency exists, while Trump insists these actions are necessary to safeguard national interests. It's a clash of ideologies that could shape U.S. trade policy for years to come. What do you think? Should presidents wield such unilateral power over trade, or should Congress play a larger role? Amidst this whirlwind of trade talks and tariff threats, former Vice President Kamala Harris dropped a bombshell announcement of her own. She revealed plans to publish a memoir titled 107 Days, chronicling her intense, high-stakes presidential campaign following Joe Biden's exit from the race. Describing the experience as deeply personal and reflective, Harris shared a video teasing the book, which she says reads almost like a journal, capturing the emotions and events of those pivoting months. Will readers see this as a candid glimpse into leadership under pressure, or as political posturing ahead of future ambitions? Only time will tell. And speaking of legacy, questions linger about what exactly Trump knew regarding Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Virginia Giuffre's family is seeking answers. Add to that the House Oversight Committee's bold move to subpoena Justice Department files on Epstein, a decision spearheaded by Representative Robert Garcia, who bypassed Republican leadership, and you've got a recipe for heated debate. Is this a step toward accountability, or does it risk opening old wounds without resolution? As if that wasn't enough drama, Trump resumed his fiery critique of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, accusing him of being too late, too angry, too stupid, after the Fed opted not to lower interest rates despite repeated pleas from the former president. These verbal jabs underscore the fraught relationship between Trump and key figures in America's economic machinery. Do his criticisms hold water, or are they merely attempts to deflect blame for broader economic challenges? Finally, don't forget the quieter but equally significant stories unfolding across the nation. From Brown University reaching an agreement with the Trump administration to restore federal funding to Senate Republicans, confirming Joseph Kent, a figure criticized for embracing conspiracy theories as head of the National Counterterrorism Center, the headlines keep coming. Each development adds another layer to the complex tapestry of current events, leading us to ponder, where do we go from here, and whose voices truly matter in shaping the future? Trump's tariff deadline, last-minute deals global market impact. Trump's tariff updates, a last-minute rush for agreements. 1. Tariffs set to hit highest levels in nearly a century, as Trump proves his negotiation prowess. Published at 15:09 British Summer Time. Natalie Sherman, New York business reporter. Starting tomorrow, tariffs will be implemented that echo plans first introduced by Trump back in April. During an event he called Liberation Day, Trump showcased these rates on posters, which led to significant market instability and threats of retaliation from trading partners, including Canada and the European Union. Although the initial chaos has subsided over the past few months, many countries will find that the outcomes of their negotiations with the U.S. will not differ significantly from Trump's original proposals. For instance, goods imported from the European Union will incur a 15% tax, which is only slightly lower than the previously announced 20%. However, this is a considerable reduction from the 50% rate Trump had threatened at one point. The United Kingdom, which was the first to announce a deal with Trump, has agreed to a 10% tariff on most of its goods, despite enjoying a trade surplus with the U.S. Overall, the average tariff rate in the United States is poised to reach its highest point since the 1930s. The relatively subdued reactions both domestically and internationally indicate how effectively Trump has reshaped global perceptions of what is deemed acceptable, according to Wendy Cutler, vice president at the Asia Society Policy Institute. He's a master at all of this, frankly, she states. Insights on the South Korea agreement. We secured substantial funds. Claims trade advisor published at 14:59 British Summer Time. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently shared details about the tariff agreement reached with South Korea, which was announced on Wednesday. The U.S. will impose a 15% tariff on imports from South Korea, which previously faced a 25% levy set to take effect after the August 1 deadline. Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, elaborated on the deal during an interview with Fox News, stating, "The South Korea deal is somewhat modeled after the Japanese agreement. We secured a significant amount of money. The crucial aspect here is shipbuilding, as South Korea possesses extensive expertise in this field. This agreement, which will also see South Korea invest $350 billion, $264.1 billion in the U.S., has been celebrated as a success in South Korea, particularly given its impressive trade surplus of at least $56 billion with the U.S. last year. When comparing the two economies, South Korea is roughly half the size of Japan. So, the $350 billion we are receiving from South Korea is comparable to the $550 billion we obtained from Japan," Navarro added. 3. Treasury Secretary Bessent, tariff rates may rebound to April levels. Published at 14:55 British Summer Time. In a recent CNBC interview, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent mentioned that tariff rates could potentially rebound back to the April 2nd levels. When Trump first announced his new and elevated tariffs on Liberation Day in April, he indicated that some countries would face unprecedented rates. However, he later paused these rates, many exceeding 30%, while the U.S. engaged in negotiations with its trading partners. Bessent noted that these rates could be reinstated for countries that fail to reach agreements. He cited South Korea as an example of successful negotiations, stating, "They came in yesterday afternoon with a very strong offer. President Trump adjusted the offer slightly, and we reached a favorable agreement, resulting in 15% tariffs." 4. Negotiations with India have left Trump feeling frustrated, says Bessent. Published at 14:48 British Summer Time, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressed that reaching a deal with India has been a source of frustration for Trump. He indicated uncertainty about whether an agreement could be finalized before the impending deadline. It's up to India now. They came to the table early, but their progress has been slow, which has left the president and the entire trade team feeling somewhat frustrated, he remarked. Besant also criticized India's purchase and refinement of Russian oil, stating, "They have not been a commendable global actor." 5. Anticipation builds at the White House on Tariff Eve, published at 14:46, British Summertime. Bern Debusman Jr. reporting from the White House. As the tariff deadline approaches, global attention is focused on President Donald Trump and the White House. Trump is not expected to address the tariffs directly until 1600 EDT, 2000 BST, when he is scheduled to sign an executive order in the Oval Office. White House officials have informed the BBC that this order will aim to reinstate the presidential fitness test, which was a requirement for American public school students until it was discontinued in 2012. This event will be open to the White House press pool, who will likely pose questions regarding tariffs. Additionally, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt is set to hold a briefing at 1300 EDT, 1800 BST, which will likely focus heavily on tariffs alongside updates on the situation in Gaza. 6. New tariff set to launch, but their legality is questionable. Published at 14:44 British Summertime. The upcoming round of tariffs is on the verge of implementation, but a significant issue looms. They may be deemed illegal under U.S. law. Earlier this year, a trade court ruled against these tariffs, siding with businesses and states that argued Trump lacked the authority to impose many of his sweeping tariffs, which he justified under a national emergency law from the 1970s. This case has been escalated to the appeals court, which is scheduled to hear arguments today. Businesses contend that the law does not grant the power to impose tariffs, a responsibility traditionally held by Congress, and that the U.S. trade deficit does not constitute a national emergency. The White House maintains that the law empowers the president to regulate imports, asserting that it is the president, not the courts, who determines what qualifies as an emergency. The tariffs have remained in place while the case is ongoing and are expected to eventually reach the Supreme Court. Regardless of the ruling, it is likely that tariffs will persist, even if Trump must resort to alternative legal measures. 7. No significant changes observed on the New York Stock Exchange. Published at 14:37 British Summertime. The New York Stock Exchange has just opened its doors. Here's a snapshot of today's market performance. Nasdaq Composite up by 0.7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average no change, 0%. S&P 500 Index down by 1%, 8. Trump speaks out with just 14 hours until the deadline. Published at 14:36 British Summertime. As the deadline approaches, Trump has taken to Truth Social to assert that his tariffs on numerous countries are making America great rich once more. Here are some of his remarks. On the deadline, as of August 1st, tariffs on goods from several key trading partners will take effect. Many countries have yet to finalize agreements that would alleviate the tariffs Trump intends to impose. The tide has completely turned, and America has effectively countered this barrage of tariffs directed at it, Trump stated. Regarding the legal challenges to the tariffs, the legality of these tariffs will be scrutinized in a U.S. appeals court today, and Trump mentioned that his legal team is working to save the country. If our country cannot defend itself by employing tariffs against tariffs, we would be dead, with no chance of survival or success, he wrote. On Canada, Canada has yet to finalize a trade agreement with the U.S., and after Prime Minister Mark Carney announced plans to recognize a Palestinian state, Trump expressed his dissatisfaction, stating, "That will make it very hard for us to reach a trade deal with them." On India, the U.S. is poised to impose a 25% tariff on India, along with an unspecified penalty for purchasing Russian oil and weapons. "I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their failing economies down together, for all I care," Trump posted. 9. From a successful Oval Office meeting to uncertain negotiations, the current state of talks with Canada. Published at 14:30 British Summer Time. Jessica Murphy, BBC News, Toronto. Canada's Prime Minister won the April general election by presenting himself as the leader capable of confronting the self-proclaimed Tariff man in the White House. In May, Mark Carney traveled to Washington to engage with the president and formally initiate trade and security discussions. The Prime Minister received praise for his handling of the meeting, despite Trump's comments about making Canada the 51st state of the U.S. As the G7 summit approached, which Canada hosted in June, it was rumored that the two nations were nearing an agreement. During the summit, Trump and Carney met again, and Trump acknowledged that challenges remained, stating he is a tariff person, while Carney has a more complex idea. Despite this, they appeared hopeful and set a late July deadline for a deal. Since then, Canada has abandoned a digital services tax that American tech companies opposed, continued negotiations despite Trump's threats to withdraw, and pushed the deadline to August. Trump has indicated he would raise Canada's baseline tariffs from 25% to 35% and impose global tariffs on copper, a significant Canadian export. This month, both Trump and Carney have dampened expectations for a swift, tariff-free agreement. The United States and Canada can achieve many positive outcomes together. We have done so in the past and can do more in the future, but only on fair terms for our country, Carney stated on Monday. He added that the complex negotiations are currently in an intense phase. Meanwhile, Trump expressed on social media that Canada's plans to recognize a Palestinian state will make it very hard to finalize a deal. 10. Tracing the path to this point. Published at 14:19 British Summer Time. Natalie Sherman, New York business reporter. Shortly after Donald Trump returned to the White House in January, he began increasing tariffs, disregarding warnings from economists and businesses about the potential economic repercussions. He initially targeted Mexico, Canada, and China, then shifted focus to steel, aluminum, and automobiles. Finally, in April, during what he termed Liberation Day, he unleashed a wave of new taxes on goods from various countries. These plans disrupted trade and unsettled financial markets. However, as concerns grew, Trump quickly suspended his most aggressive proposals to allow for 90 days of negotiations. The original deadline was set for July 9th, but Trump extended it to August 1st as the White House sought to finalize trade agreements. The administration sent letters to numerous world leaders warning them of the impending higher tariffs. Now, that deadline has arrived. 11. China deal not fully finalized, according to Treasury Secretary. Published at 13:53 British Summer Time, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressed confidence that a trade agreement with China will be reached, but he noted that it is not fully finalized. In a Thursday interview with CNBC, Bessent mentioned that a few technical details still need to be addressed on China's end, and he plans to discuss these with President Trump later today. He also expressed uncertainty regarding trade relations with India, stating that the country has not been a commendable global actor, referring to its ties with Russia. Trump began increasing tariffs on Chinese goods shortly after his return to the White House, prompting China to respond with its own tariffs. Tensions escalated, with tariff rates reaching triple digits before a trade truce was established in May. As a result, Chinese goods now face an additional 30% tariff compared to the beginning of the year, while U.S. goods are subject to a new 10% tariff in China. The truce between the U.S. and China has a deadline of August 12th, unlike most of Trump's tariffs, which are set to take effect on August 1st. 12. Understanding tariffs. Published at 13:49 British Summer Time. Tariffs are taxes imposed on goods imported from other countries. Typically, these taxes are calculated as a percentage of the product's value. For example, a 10% tariff on a $10 product means an additional $1 tax, bringing the total cost to the importer to $11, £8.35. Companies that import foreign goods into the U.S. are required to pay this tax to the government, and they may choose to pass some or all of this additional cost on to consumers. Additionally, businesses may opt to import fewer goods as a result of these tariffs. 13. Countdown to Trump's Tariff Deadline. Published at 1344 British Summertime, Brandon Livesay reporting from New York. Welcome to our live coverage as we track the developments in global trade leading up to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff deadline. The sweeping tariffs are set to take effect at 01 EDT, 0501 BST on Friday. Trump announced these levies in April, causing chaos in the global economy. However, he paused their implementation to allow countries to negotiate new trade agreements. As the clock ticks down, many nations still lack a deal with the U.S. and face steep tariff rates when the deadline arrives, with rates as high as 50% for Brazil. Stay tuned for updates on new agreements, market reactions, and expert analysis on the implications of these developments.